Thanks, my friend. Good morning, everyone. How are y'all doing today? I hope everyone is doing well. Thank you all for being here. We're going to get started as it is now a little bit past noon. I know our SHIP alumni are very busy folks. So my name is Lauren Hill, and I am our event coordinator in the Office of Alumni Relations here at Shippensburg University. And today's webinar is the first of a series of webinars we'll be holding this year to highlight alumni talents and to connect our alumni to experts in their field. So if you have a topic of interest that you would like to propose as a webinar for SHIP alumni, don't hesitate to reach out to the Alumni Relations Office. We would love to discuss it further with you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our alumni host today, Brenda Reynolds. So Brenda is a proud Shippensburg alum, where she received her bachelor's in communication arts and secondary education in 1983. She also holds a master's in organization development from American University in Washington, D.C. Brenda is the best-selling author of TBD, To Be Determined, Leading with Clarity and Confidence in Uncertain Times, a TEDx speaker on navigating transition fog, an international keynote speaker, and a frequent radio and podcast guest on the topic of change. So we are just so excited to have Brenda here with us today, and I will let her take it away. Thank you so much, Brenda.
Thank you, Lauren, and welcome to everyone. I know I should say good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. I'm very excited by the participation today. It looks like we've got folks from Delaware and Texas and Maryland, Florida, Vermont, New Jersey, California, Virginia, and of course Pennsylvania, where I reside in the greater Philadelphia area. So if I haven't mentioned your state and you're representing your state here on the webinar, feel free to type that into the chat box and let us know that you are here. I'm sharing my contact information on this first screen. I welcome any connection that you'd like to keep beyond this webinar. So please take advantage of that, and I'll share it again at the end of our session. First thing I'm wondering about is who is in the room. I shared some of our locations. If there's a state I've missed, please type that in. But I'm also curious about the role you play. I know that we've got, potentially, we've got some leaders in the room. We've got students in the room. We've got teachers and practitioners and therapists in the room. So I'd love to know your role and what drew you to the webinar topic today. What made you say, I'm going to invest my hour on this topic? Perhaps you're going through a change that you saw coming and you planned and you created, or perhaps you're dealing with a change that you never saw coming. And so I'd be curious about your situation. Oh, we've got Idaho here. That's fabulous. Welcome, Idaho. So I'll take just a minute to hear you know, where you're all from and what brought you here. You've got a child and adolescent mental health therapist, adjunct faculty member experiencing some career change, another person in higher education experiencing a career change. I think you're in good company. We've got a number of people who are facing that here in the new year, so I think this will be very appropriate for you all. Higher education, government, retirement, or refirement, as I like to call it, healthcare profession. Fabulous. Well, welcome to the webinar. Without further ado, we're going to get started. And I do myself rather casually, so you'll see that in the webinar. I really wish you could really be in the room with me today, because that seems more natural to me, but I'm going to pretend you are anyway, and let's get started. Participation. We have muted everyone for the simple matter that we've got quite a few folks on our webinar today, and that's the best way for us to keep from making it too chaotic. But at any time during the webinar, even if I haven't asked for you to share a question, please do. And Lauren's going to help me with that and flag questions that may be coming up that I can answer in the here and the now. And I'll pause on occasion to solicit your questions as well. I'm hoping that the webinar invites more participation than the guy you see on the screen right now. So here's what you don't know about me from Lauren's introduction. I am from a humble beginning, from a small town called New Berlin, Pennsylvania. And one of the ways we know if you are local or not is by the way you pronounce it. If you say New Berlin, we know you're an outsider. If you say New Berlin, we know that you're one of us. And that's about an hour north of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Population 800. Red lights, 0. Biggest building in town, the post office. It's a very, very quaint place, and I really felt like I was venturing out into the world when I left New Berlin, Pennsylvania, and headed to Shippensburg University way back when. It was my foray into the world. And yet the one thing that came with me was this feeling that, I came from a humble and simple background in beginning. My parents were 19 and 17 when I was born, so you might say I was born into complexity. I was born into uncertainty. And I always felt, having come from a small town in Pennsylvania, that I didn't have the gift of making things harder than they needed to be, but I was often surrounded by people who could take topics and make them sound far more complicated than in my mind they were. I never got that gift in the way that I write or in the way that I speak or the way that I present. I'm all about taking complexity and making it more simple. So today we're going to talk about change and uncertainty and finding some clarity and confidence along the way in a way that I hope is really relatable to you. And I'll tell you a story later about my mom to bring that point home. I think the world today is actually calling for more simplicity. And when we're going through complexity, that's what we welcome and that's what we value. So my goal is to present this in a way that's really easy to understand, but not always easy to apply. And I'm going to reference a term you may or may not heard of, but the military coined this term after the Cold War. And they said, we're living in a VUCA world. And that is an acronym that stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I don't think there's any doubt that this describes the world we're living in right now. And so the world is calling for some simple wisdom. And so I'm going to share with you some concepts that come right out of the book that I published last year. It's called TBD, To Be Determined, Leading with Clarity and Confidence in Uncertain Times. I'll mention it a few times throughout the program because what I'm doing is extracting some concepts from it for our purposes today, knowing that I can't cover all of it, but I can certainly cover some of those things that I think might be most relevant for you all. The new year always seems to bring transition with it and change with it. So let's talk about that. And, I'm going to share some of my own stories along the way, because when I wrote this book a year ago, I wrote the manuscript, and then I did what we often do when we're dealing with uncertainty. I got really determined to find a title. And it was driving me crazy that I didn't have a title. I created numerous titles and then discarded them for one reason or the other. And I really, really was obsessing about it, if you will. And then I went to a program in Philadelphia that was attended by about 50 of my colleagues. And we had to stand up and do a presentation on a flip chart and introduce ourselves. And so in the bottom corner of my flip chart, I had drawn a little book and I had written TBD on it because I didn't have a title. And as I was explaining to the group what I was up to, I said, if anyone in this room is good at titles, I'm looking for a title. I'm writing this book about uncertainty, and I'm just not able to find a title. And they said, oh, that's your title. I said, no, TBD is not my title. That's a placeholder until I find a title, but I'm open to titles. In unison, 50 people yelled back at me, that's your title. And then I began to think about why that was such an appropriate title. And it's because we often are really good at getting determined and figuring out the actions we need to take. We want to move desperately and quickly through times of uncertainty. So the determination absolutely kicks in. And yet, what we're not so good at being is patient. And understanding that part of this process has to do with how to be during uncertainty, because life just brings one uncertainty after the next our way. That is what life is all about. And so we need to both be present and able to be, as well as determined, and that's why I thought it was a perfect title. Not only that, Plan A is an illusion, and I believe we need to practice what I call Plan B, but I spell that B-E. How should we be with uncertainty? And so I began to write a book that I hoped people could understand readily, that would draw on my background as an organization development consultant. I've worked with big organizations, small organizations, higher education, secondary education, every kind of organization you can imagine, to do various kinds of interventions to make the workplace more tolerable, to make it a place where people can thrive and be at their best. And most of the time I get called into organizations who have included AOL in their heyday, Nemours Pediatric Hospital System, Moen, Sherwin-Williams. And I get called on when they are going through some kind of complexity or some change that they need to manage through. And what I learned is that I was using those concepts with my clients, and I wanted to write about them because many of my clients did not understand those concepts themselves as leaders. No one ever taught them these concepts that I had the privilege of knowing and using. So I wanted to share them, and these were some of the topics that came to mind. One of the other reasons that I created the book is because in 2008, my life, along with the economy at the time, took a nosedive. And life as I knew it stopped being true. I found myself unexpectedly divorcing, becoming a single mom with 2 small boys, a consulting practice, but no guaranteed income, no health care benefits, and facing the question, now what? And at that time, I realized I moved through that uncertainty using many of the concepts that I use in my work life. And so while the book focuses, and often I am focused on serving clients, these concepts serve us in our personal lives as well. That's why I'm excited to be talking with you today. Whether you're here facing some change in the workplace or some change in your your personal life, the concepts hold true. So let's get started and talk further about them. When I think back to 2008, I can get really very much back in that space. I remember sitting in the sunroom of my home at the time with my face in my hands and clearly distraught and unable to fathom how I would move forward in my life. Nothing prepared me for it. And I say that this thick, dense fog rolled in over my perfect life plan. And I later coined it transition fog. Transition fog is when you find yourself somewhere between the way it was, the thing you understand, the comfortable, don't have to think about it situation, and how it will be, even though you can't see what the future is going to look like yet. And the space in between is called uncertainty. And uncertainty is unsettling. You're in that in-between space. You're in a space that you wish you could rush through as quickly as possible, and yet we can't. So what I want to share with you as we talk is that there are some benefits for staying in uncertainty for a while, even though it doesn't feel like a popular place to be. The source of this fog that rolls in, and maybe it's rolled in over you recently, comes from 2 things. It comes from our not knowing what's next. Literally, not being able to see our way forward. And then the emotions that that stirs up, our anxiety, our worry, and our fear. And the minute we start focusing on that unclear future, what I can tell you is the emotions get even stronger. So if you find yourself dealing with a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry, and a lot of fear, it's usually a sign that one of two things is happening. You're either overly focused on the way it was, or you're overly focused on the way it will be, and you can't see it yet. And it's often a sign that what you really need to do is get focused in the present, in the here and the now, and start sorting through some of the transition fog. So how do we do that? How do we navigate it? I began to navigate that time in my life the same way you would navigating a country road and moving through the fog. I started using some of those same instincts, and it turns out they're pretty darn good instincts for managing fog. Let's talk about a few of those. Before I do that, let me pause here and ask the question. What other kinds of fog might you be dealing with, or what questions may you have already about navigating the fog, or what transition fog is the way I've described it? Take a minute to let you chime in. So let's start talking about navigating that fog. The first instinct in the fog is to slow down. Now, it feels when we're in uncertainty like things are going extremely slowly. But the fact is, even when we're driving in the fog, we lose the perspective on how fast we're actually going, because our brain registers speed relative to the surroundings. And in the fog, we can't see the houses and the buildings and the trees that are flashing by. And so it feels like we're going painfully slow. And yet research shows that even on the road, we are traveling faster than we think we are. So I share that with you because during this time of change, it's going to feel like life is moving incredibly slowly. You're going to wish you could move through it faster, get to the other side of it, experience less worry, anxiety, and fear. And yet be patient with yourself, because your chances are you are moving faster than you think you are. So slowing down right now, even though it feels too slow, is the right thing to do, so that you don't make decisions out of emotion and before you have all of the facts for moving forward. The key is to focus on the next right move, or what I call putting on your low beams. When you're driving on a country road, you can see about 350 feet in front of you. That's it. And if you try to use your high beams to see further, it only obscures your view and makes it worse. So the low beams are enough. It's all we need to do. And when you can focus on the next right move, the thing that you know you have to do next, and focus just on that, you'll find that some of that anxiety, worry, and fear will go away. And I will tell you, I practice this every day, because as you all know, we all have complex work lives, and we wake up in the morning or we head to the office and we get there, and there are a million things we could be focused on. And if we try to focus on all of them, it's very difficult to do. And so I will each day create my list of the few things, the key things that I want to focus that day, put my low beams on, and try to block out the extraneous complexity around me so that I can move those things forward. And just like driving on a road, the more you string one stretch of road after the other together, somehow you get to your destination, but it happens one next move at a time. So my question is this: as you're thinking right now about the complexity you're in, what's the one next move that you are ready, willing, and able to make? And you may make a mental note of this, you may want to write it down, you may want to share it. But that's the only focus you need to be thinking about right now. So if you're somebody who's in a job transition and you've yet to update your resume, your next move may be, I need to work on my resume, or I may need to contract with someone to help me with my resume or review my resume. If you're dealing with an empty nest, which is my case, what is my one next move? It may be that I plan an outing for the weekend. I plan to have some people come over so that it doesn't feel so empty in my home. So whatever it is you're dealing with, what is your next move? I'm getting a lot of comments about the concept of embracing the fog and not fighting it. Yes, absolutely not fighting it. And we will get through it, I promise you. So not only are we navigating it by putting on our low beams, I call it turning down the radio too, is important. And here's what I mean by that. Have you ever noticed when you're driving in a place where you don't know where you are, or you can't see real well, and you're in the fog, or it's raining hard, or it's snowing, unless it's just me, I tend to turn down the radio. And we do that so that we can think. We can hear ourselves think, so that we can concentrate. And during times of complexity, it's been my experience that there's this radio program in our head, it's this voice in our head that I've come to call my yama yama, that is quite critical, and it wants to shame me, should all over me, make me feel badly, tell me I should be moving faster, feeling better sooner. And that voice, frankly, is trying to protect us. But at this point, it would be nice to turn the volume down on it. Say, thank you very much. That's our ego. Turn it down, dismiss it, and continue on the way. On the journey, I also advise that we need to avoid potholes. And there are any number of potholes that we need to avoid. The first pothole I referenced a little bit earlier, and that's the pothole of impatience. We can get very impatient with ourselves, and it can be really unsettling when we're going through tough times, to the point where we even dread, and maybe you can relate to this, do you dread the question, how are you? Those three simple words sometimes have us coming up short because we don't know what to say. There's so much fog in our path, we're not sure whether we should be honest, if people really care, or even how to answer. So I would advise you to be very patient with yourself during this time. The other pothole that we sometimes come up against is the pothole of comparison. We naturally compare ourselves to others. And honestly, it's an unfair comparison because people show us their best selves. Their jobs look great, their bank accounts seem fabulous, their lifestyle seems terrific, their relationships all seem to be sailing, and we find ourselves doing something that's really unfair to ourselves. We're comparing what we know about our messy, raggedy scenario with what people are showing us about their situation. And we aren't comparing apples to apples, we're comparing apples to oranges. That's why we're often so surprised when we hear about somebody's situation that's gone south. When we compare to others, we only feel worse about ourselves and our situation. And while I promised you these were going to be some simple concepts to talk about, they're very hard to do. When I was going through my divorce, I took this weird solace in the fact that Jennifer Aniston was getting divorced at the same time from Brad Pitt. And I took solace in the fact that at least my situation wasn't being splashed all over the media and People magazine. And I even stopped reading People magazine for quite some time because I didn't like how it exploits people's failures or their complexity in their own lives. But here's what I will tell you. If you want to pick up a copy of People magazine, it's always a good reminder that change and uncertainty affects everyone and it doesn't discriminate, no matter who you are, what your income level is, what your career is, or what your job is. So please, please be careful of that. In today's world, it's difficult with social media. But I have also found for folks who are going through some kind of distraction or complexity or change, that avoiding social media for a while may be an okay thing to do. It's its own huge pothole where everyone is sharing their very best online. And then I would suggest that you never travel alone. We all have those friends who know us inside and out. You know, those friends that you can be your absolute authentic self for, and they love you anyway. Whether it's a colleague at work who's navigating this journey with you, or it's a friend. But I would suggest you never travel alone. Maybe it's the team at work who's going through something. Talk about it, work through it together, because going alone is not something that helps us on the journey. So think about it right now. You don't have to share this with me, but think about the potholes that you specifically need to avoid, and I've only talked about a couple here today, and who it is that you feel very comfortable traveling with because they tell you the truth, but they support you and they care about you, and you can be your authentic self with. So take just a minute to reflect on that. And if you've got some potholes in mind that you struggle with, please do share them on the chat. Okay. Here's what I want you to know about fog before we move on to a couple of other topics. Fog does seem scary, and it does seem like something you want to fight or something you want to resist. But we often don't realize that fog, renamed, is simply a freaking opportunity for growth. Yep, that's what it is. When I was in graduate school at American University, we were in a cohort program, and we were together for 2 years. So we became one big dysfunctional family, if you will. And every time some shift would happen, we'd say, not another fog. It's a freaking opportunity for growth, but going through that growth is not necessarily fun. It isn't until the fog is in the rearview mirror that you realize how far you've come and how far you've grown. And so that's my reframe for you on the concept of fog and the concept of navigating it relative to situations of change. What questions do you have so far before I continue? Please feel free to share those. And feel free to take and spread these terms with others, this concept of navigating transition fog and fog being an opportunity for growth. In fact, if you want to hear a little bit more on the topic or share it with others, this is the topic that I shared on my TEDx Wilmington at the Wilmington Women's Conference last year. You can find that online. So if we say that plan A is an illusion, get ready for plan B. One of the things we have to be ready for is to plan our change, but to plan to transition. What do I mean by that? Well, I want to give appropriate credit to two people you may or may never have heard about, but William Bridges and Susan Bridges, who came up with this concept of transition. And they differentiated transition from change. And here's why. Maybe some of you are even in the midst of a move. Let's imagine that, because most of us have had that experience. When you're in a situation where you're making a move, you can plan the changes, right? You're selling your home, you're putting it on the market at least, you're packing up your boxes, you're looking for a new place. You can map out the steps of that move on a map. That's the change. They're the external events that are occurring. However, studies show that it isn't the change that messes us up as much as it is the transition. And the bridges defined transition as the psychological and emotional change that goes on in us anytime we're going through a change. I've seen this time and again in corporate America. I've seen it time and again with people going through changes in their life. In corporate America, we want to create some big change and we put it on a master plan, or we bring folks in to do some continuous improvement work. And at the end of that big investment, nothing's changed. The reason being, we as leaders and we as people in our family systems and our community systems who are moving others through change seem to forget that it's the emotional transition that gets in the way. If we aren't planning for the emotions of ourselves and others, that's often the very thing that brings up resistance or will sabotage the change. So think about the transition that you're in the midst of now. Perhaps you're leading others through it at the workplace. Perhaps you're leading your family through it. Perhaps you're leading yourself through it. And normalize the fact that we don't just take our brains to work. We take our whole selves. And that includes our hearts and our feelings and our emotions. And because we do, we move through these 3 stages of transition. The bridges called them endings, the neutral zone, and the new beginning. I've called them the way it was, what will be, and uncertainty. And the reason I'm sharing this particular graph with you is because I want to normalize each and every one of these stages so that you can be kinder to yourself. Once a change is announced, let's imagine some of you are going through some career transitions, so I'll pick up on that. Whether it's you've lost your job, you've decided to move on, your leader has resigned, you're getting a new leader, you name it. It doesn't start with hooray, celebrate the new beginning and the way it's going to be now. We start by dealing with what was and actually grieving, because we're letting go, and it can be a little sad. Or perhaps the change caught us off guard and we're shocked and we're angry. These are normal and typical emotions to be experiencing. Please know that at the beginning of any change, you're probably spending a great majority of your time in the what was area with those feelings, and a little bit of time in uncertainty and a little bit of time thinking about the future. And only as time goes by do you start spending more time in uncertainty and less time in what was and a bit more time in what will be. So let's look at how we feel, what happens when we're in the uncertainty mode. In uncertainty, like that guy who was standing between the rocks, we're between a rock and a hard place. We're mourning what was, and we can't see what's going to be just yet, and here we are. I call this the now what stage, where we're just saying, now what? And the future is yet to be determined, right? Things are unclear and uncomfortable. It feels very uncomfortable and unfamiliar. Things are not in a settled state. And so we can get impatient and frustrated. But here's the thing I want to remind you of. While it is very, very normal to feel that way, you don't want to actually rush through uncertainty too quickly. Because while you're in that unsettled state, you have some great opportunities before things lock down again to take that time to explore opportunities, to ask yourself, now what? What's really important? What do we need to consider? What are some creative options that we could employ? And what's possible? And it's in that state that great things can emerge. You may know people who have lost their jobs and very quickly grabbed the next job to come along and spent very little time in uncertainty. And yet those who spend time there have an opportunity to really say, where am I in my life now? What's really important to me? What are my values at this stage? What's a good fit for me? Do I want to stay in this industry? Do I want to move? Do I want to geographically move? There are so many things that if they explore that will land them in a better situation down the road, even if it takes a little bit longer. Once we get through what was and the uncertainty, the new beginning or the what will be is easy. That's the positive space where we've settled into a new norm. Things are even better. We can get excited. We can accept where we are, and things start to feel settled. But please know that everyone's going to move through these stages, and you're going to do them simultaneously. It's not a linear process, and there isn't any one period of time that everyone moves through this stage in. It's different for everybody, and it depends on the change that you are experiencing. The question that we ask ourselves is, now what? Very quickly, I want to cover a couple of other topics that are in the book in greater detail. But when we're going through change and transition, I had a professor say, think about what you're thinking. And that was Dr. Bob Marshak. Just ran into him recently and told him that I talk about him on occasion. But when Dr. Marshak mentioned this to me in our class, I didn't really truly know what he was talking about until he explained this thing called the ladder of inference. And this is the work that was written up by Chris Argyris years ago in the Fifth Discipline Field book on strategies and tools for building a learning organization. But it is just so divine in its simplicity. And here's what the ladder of inference says. Essentially, whatever you think about is what you're going to notice, and it's going to affect and determine your actions. So if you look at the bottom of this ladder, there's a lot of things out there right now in your life, whatever is going on, that you could be paying attention to. A lot of observable data. We tend to select out certain data and pay attention to it. And from there, we add meaning, we make some assumptions, we draw conclusions. This informs a belief system, if you will, and that belief system creates some actions on our behalf. And you'll notice that most of this happens in a nanosecond, and it happens in our heads where no one can see it happening, and we often don't even realize what's going on. We just know that something happens and we take action. Let me share a story with you. I was once coaching someone who was experiencing some turmoil in the workplace, and she came to me and said, you know, I think I'm being asked to be coached because the team doesn't value me, my boss wants me to quit, and I'm not succeeding here whatsoever. And I knew from the client that hired me that that was not true. In fact, they valued her, they wanted to have her get support and move through a complicated time. And yet, she would come to me each and every session having selected out data to support her hypothesis that she was not valued. She had put meaning on that, which is why she thought she was being coached. She made an assumption that they wanted her to quit, and she began to act out. And so one day I said to her, here's the possibility I'm going to put in front of you. What if you pretended that you were actually valued, that they want to support you, have you stay here, and see you take the next step? Your assignment for the next 2 weeks is to go out and, of all of the data that is out there to observe, I want you to be noticing the data that things are okay. She came back to me at our next session, and before she said a word, I knew something had happened because she looked alive and completely different. And I asked her how her homework went, and she said, you'll never believe it. I am feeling so much better. I really have noticed that people are treating me better, that I am feeling more valued, and so on and so forth. Nothing had changed except the story that she was making up and what she was willing to look for. So during times of change, it's very easy to play victim. It's very tempting to lament this thing that's happened to us that we didn't choose. It's very easy to get down on ourselves. Or we can choose to look at the data and select different data, look at it differently, and create a new story that says, I didn't want this, but here's an opportunity, and I wonder what's next for me. This is happening for some reason. I get to make some choices, and instead of living in fear of the change, be a wanderer, not a worrier. You get that? Wanderer, W-O-N-D-E-R. Live in wonder. I wonder why this is happening. I wonder what opportunity this is bringing my way. I wonder what's next. And when we wonder, it creates a little bit of excitement and positive anticipation. When we worry, we get more of the negativity. We get less inclined to be able to take that next right move. We feel less good about ourselves. We are less likely to attract the positive changes that we want to in our life. So that is the ladder of inference in a nutshell, but I share it with you because I sometimes have to catch myself to this day. You can know all of this, and doing it is different. Thinking about what I'm thinking. So depending on the change that you're experiencing right now, reflect in this moment. What are you spending your time thinking about? And then change that up. Think about what you're thinking. If you've got any questions about it, please share them with me. I'm really glad it's resonating for many of you who have made that comment online. Now, I'll warn you, you may not like the next one because it's asking you to be totally responsible. I'm going to cover this quickly and then take your questions. And here's what I mean by that. You are responsible. No, you didn't make this thing happen necessarily. You can't help if there was a change at work. You can't help if you've lost your job. However, there is one thing that you have total and complete responsibility for, and I was introduced to this by Dr. Michael Durst many, many years ago, and it was the notion of responsibility. No matter what's come our way, we have the ability to choose our response, and you always have the power to choose one of 3 different responses. I'm going to move to those. Here we go. Here are your powerful choices even when you feel like life is falling down around you. The first one I recommend is, in your situation, ask yourself, what can I change or influence? And if you can change or influence your situation, put your focus there. Try that first. If I can't change or influence it, the next question is, then I may need to accept it. At least for now. Maybe you accept it temporarily while you work on another track. And if I can't change or influence it, I can't accept it even for now, then chances are we have to get out of it. And these are the only 3 choices we have in most life situations. It applies almost across the board. And what I like about it is they are powerful reminders that even when things aren't going the way we wish they would, that we always have choice. So I'm going to move ahead here. Think about your choice in the situation that you're in. What is it you need to do first? Is there some change you need to try to affect or influence? Is there some way you need to try to find to accept what's going on? Or is this something that you have a way to get out of or a desire to get out of? And then be fueled by a TBD mindset. Now, this is an entire chapter in the book, but let me tell you how I define a TBD mindset. You're going to experience a lot of feelings, and so you need to feel and deal with those. It's okay. If you don't feel them, you can't deal with them. It's a time to give yourself what you most need and take care of yourself, to create a dream team and be surrounded by people who can help you on the path, to make sure that the past doesn't override your positive present and future. To be joyful and positively expectant. That means, to live in anticipation of what's next rather than fear. To actually be grateful for your fog. Appreciate yourself and what you're going through right now. Appreciate others. Try to find a way to have some fun, and believe the fog will pass. I promise you. And most times when I interview folks about their fog, they always tell me that although they wouldn't want to go through it again, that fog has somehow led them to a destination that is far better than the one they were in. I think that change is often here to nudge us out of accepting what is currently as, quote, good enough, and moving us on to something that could be even better. Because I believe that behind every now what is a why not ready to be unleashed. Someone's asking me, how do you do this when the change you're going through may take years? And here's what I have found, and you know, it sounds like you're dealing with a lot of changes all at once. I've been there. Life as I knew it in 2008, every single aspect of my life got turned on its head. Every single one. And that's why I needed to step back and just take it one next right move at a time. And sometimes the next right moves don't even feel overly logical. But if your voice, your internal voice and gut is telling you that's what you need to do, pay attention to it. Turn down the voice of criticism and that voice of everyone else trying to tell you what to do, and pay attention to what you know is true. In fact, I would suggest that most changes do evolve over long periods of time. I don't think they're necessarily short. I don't think we move through them super quickly. So just think about what you're thinking, and that may be that you're thinking this should happen quickly, and there's no way it's going to happen quickly. I'm glad the story about the woman I coached is an aha moment. Take it and run. Fill in the blanks with you. I tell another story in my book about my own aha moment on an airplane related to the ladder of inference that you may find somewhat humorous and amusing. So other questions, go ahead. I'm reserving this time here at the end of the call, and trust me, I have so many more things we could talk about, but I want to reserve this time for you to engage with any questions you may have. I have been talking to a lot of, while you're typing your questions, I'll continue. I've been talking to a lot of people here in the new year, and you know, we go into this New Year's Eve celebration, but the fact is that most people in the new year are struggling with some kind of change or transition. We're dealing with the aftermath of having had children off school and then having them leave our home or go back to school. We're dealing with the exhaustion of the holidays. We may be dealing with post-holiday letdown, coming back to work, and any of the changes that many companies embark on in a new year are hitting us all at once. We may be challenged by relationships that are going on in our life. In fact, I've come to term it the divorce season, because research shows that starting the second week of January, more couples file for divorce than any other time of the year. They've waited for the new year. They're looking to make a new start. The attorneys are back in the office full time the second week in January. And so a lot of folks are suffering with a lot of change and heartache right now. And so we are not alone in that. So notice that. And for those of you who live in the cold weather, you know, the weather is gloomy, the days are short, we don't have as much sunshine. So I don't want to underestimate how many folks are experiencing changes of all kinds, always in January. Someone's asking what I would advise to a spouse or family member when dealing with someone that refuses to change the way they think or say it's not possible. So you're not going to like my answer. We can't change the way somebody else thinks about a situation. We can only change the way we think about a situation and be there to support them. Support may look like showing them possibilities, or just being with them in their being distressed and distraught. You may need to change the way you're thinking about your spouse and what they're doing and dealing with. I'd be happy to connect with you offline to talk further about that, because I think that the answer is a lot longer and more complicated than we can cover here on the call. Great. I really truly wish, for those of you who are out there in academia, I really truly wish more of this content were shared with our young people. I think children are going through changes constantly. Social media, the high school years, the college years. I hate to say it, but in our school district recently, in the past year, we have had 4 suicides. And I remember my son saying about his freshman year in college, "Mom, I'm not as happy as I think I should be. Everyone tells me these are the best years of my life, and it's not feeling like the best year of my life." We do our kids a disservice when we say that, because they're going through one of the biggest life transitions ever when they do go to college. And so I wish this were more widely shared with parents and students at all levels. My youngest son is in college, and let me tell you, I jumped for joy during parent orientation when William and Susan Bridges' work on transition was shared with parents and the students at that time. So I'm hoping it serves you, and that perhaps you can find a way to share more of this with the people that you serve. I'd love to stay in touch, and here's how we can stay connected. I'm showing you my social media and email and website so that you can stay connected there. I have the book that goes into a lot more detail on the concepts we talked about today and many more. I also am getting ready to launch something called the Now What Transformation Conversation Club. And that is for people who would like a steady dose of information and inspiration to help them through their changes and their now what moments. And I'll tell you what, for you all, I'm going to share with you a very short 45-second video ad that we just put together about the community that we're getting ready to launch. And if it's something that interests you, you can go to the nowwhattransformation.com and pre-register for it. It's a subscription-based program that costs you less than a lunch each month to get some fabulous video information, a welcome box with tools in it, including a card deck for how to manage through your uncertain times. And I really wanted to be able to put something out there in the world that was both useful and easily affordable and keeps us connected. So let me play this for you briefly, and then we'll start to close down. Just when you begin to feel ready and certain for what's next in life, something unexpected happens. Maybe that change that's occurring for you is allowing you to question what is as good enough and moving you along to something better. And it begs the question, now what? There you go. You were the first to see it. So I hope you enjoyed it. And I promised you that I would tell you another story about my mother. Oops, excuse me here.
When it comes to project workflow. But things got wonky for Whitney when she
I almost got through this without a
38 emails. Make that 639.
technological faux pas. But you know what we say, expect the unexpected. And that was the unexpected. Good thing I know how to deal with Plan B. Anyway, the story I wanted to share about my mother in closing today is this. I wrote this book and I made it such that you could read it on an airplane ride and easily get through it. And I wanted it to be easily understandable. One day I was having a particularly bad day and I called my mother and had my own little meltdown about what was going on in my life. To which my mother said, Brenda, I think I forgot to tell you that I finished reading your book. I'm like, wow, that's great, Mom. And she said, and here's what I'm going to tell you. There may be a few chapters that you need to revisit. So here's the thing. I said, Mom, you don't get to do that. You don't get to use my material against me. However, what I loved about it is that it was something that my mom could take and digest and helped her through some challenges that she was experiencing in her life with the loss of her mother-in-law and a number of other things. So I invite you to grab it and be in touch and tell me how I might be able to continue to support you. And so with that, Lauren, I want to hand it back over to you and thank you for your support today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brenda. That presentation was just so informative and so applicable to such a wide variety of audiences and situations. And personally, I can't wait to try to employ some of those techniques. So if you guys are like me, alums, and you want to go back and review some of the ideas and techniques we talked about today, make sure you check the email you registered with, and I'll be sure to send out a recording of this session for review here shortly, in addition to Brenda's contact information and a link to her book and other works. So a million times over, thank you to Brenda again for taking time with us today. It's just so truly appreciated. And for those alumni that are joining us locally, I also want to draw your attention to our next upcoming alumni event. So the first Saturday in February, the Alumni Office and President Lori Carter will be at the Heritage Center in Chambersburg for a special ship suite during the annual Ice Fest celebration in Chambersburg. So we'll have hot cocoa and cookies and the chance for a selfie with our ship ice sculpture. And you can register for all of that under our events calendar at ship.edu/alumni. So we truly hope to see you there or at our next gathering. And thank you all again so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoy the rest of your week and you guys take care. Thanks again, everyone.
Bye-bye.